You know those detergent pods you have? Well, you know how they stay together? They're wrapped in plastic. That film around your pods is plastic, and it's ending up in our oceans, our rivers, our soil, and maybe even in us. Well, Blue Land is on a mission to eliminate single-use plastic by reinventing cleaning essentials to be better for you and the planet with the same powerful clean you're used to. Blue Land uses no single-use plastic in any component, not their bottles, not their tablets, not even the wrappers to ship. Their tablet packaging is fully compostable. Blue Land products are effective. They are affordable. Their dishwasher tablets are proven to perform on baked-on, burnt-on stains. No rinse aid is needed. You can even get more savings by buying refills in bulk and setting up a subscription. Their subscriptions are customizable. They're convenient. You never run out of your most used products. Blue Land's trusted in over 1 million homes, including mine. I've got the dishwasher tablets. They come in like a nice little blue tin. You keep under your thing. First of all, it saves a lot of space, particularly important in an apartment. You don't need one of those big plastic jugs. But I also have 3 spray bottles. One's yellow, one's red or pinkish, and one's blue. And one's for the bathroom, the blue. The red is for windows, and the yellow is an all-purpose. And each one, when I run down and when I use it all up, I just pop another tablet in, fill it up with water, and that's it. I never buy another plastic cleaner container again. It's great. Blue Land has a special listener for our listeners right now. Get 15% off your first order by going to blueland.com/majority. You don't want to miss this. blueland.com/majority, 15% off. Link in the podcast and YouTube descriptions. And now, time for Emma and the show.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
The destiny of America is always safer in the hands of the people than in the conference rooms of any elite.
Sam Seder.
They are unanimous in their hate for me, and I welcome their hatred.
We must guard against the acquisition of unwarranted influence, whether sought or unsought, by the military-industrial complex.
The Majority Report with Sam Seder.
Ever get the feeling you've been cheated?
It is Monday, December 9th, 2024. My name is Emma Vigeland, in for Sam Seder, and this is the 5-time award-winning Majority Report. We are broadcasting live from the industrially ravaged Gowanus Canal in the heartland of America, downtown Brooklyn, USA. On the program today, John Nichols, national affairs correspondent for The Nation, has a conversation with Sam, we recorded last week, that we'll be playing for you all, as Sam's on the Nation cruise. Also on the program today, breaking news, Daniel Penny acquitted in his killing of Jordan Neely on the subway. And police detain a Pennsylvania man in their search for the healthcare CEO killer. More information coming out about that as we speak. Assad falls after a less than 2-week offensive by rebel forces, an end to this chapter of Syria's 13-year civil war. And Israel responded to this by taking more land on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights. Well, the Golan Heights is Syrian territory, but now Israel has more territory to illegally occupy. The United States responded in kind by bombing what they say are ISIS camps within Syria. And then the Turkish army exchanged fire with US-backed Kurdish forces. A reminder, Turkey and the United States are NATO allies. In South Korea, Yoon avoids impeachment after trying to invoke martial law, but protests rage for his ouster. Back in the United States, Trump reiterates his vow to end part of the 14th Amendment, birthright citizenship, and pledges to pardon January 6th insurrectionists, and says he won't promise that tariffs won't raise prices. So, groceries, the economy, all of that. Trump taps anti-lockdown and anti-woke online poster Jay Bhattacharya to head the NIH. And his pick for energy secretary? Chris Wright, a fracking CEO who has said climate change could be a positive for the world. Speaking of climate change, EU scientists confirm 2024 the hottest year on record. And lastly, AOC squares up against Jerry Connolly for the role of top Democrat on the House Oversight Committee. And insiders tell the Beltway Press she may have the votes. All this and more on today's Majority Report. Welcome to the show, everybody. It is Fun Day Monday. Whoa. But just myself and Bradley and Nat, of course. For the rest of the week, Sam will be on the Nation cruise, but you will hear his disembodied voice, probably. If you're, well, maybe not disembodied, we recorded. His body's in the, if you're watching the stream, you'll see him for ads and things like that. And then he had this conversation with John Nichols last week that we will play for you. But yet the rest of the week, it's just us. So buckle up. There's a lot of news.
I gotta get my foghorn sound effect back on every time we reference Sam being on a boat.
Yes, and who knows which right-winger will mysteriously pass away during this time period. I mean, we'll see.
Can only hope.
But yes, we will tomorrow have somebody on to talk about the enormous news out of Syria. But for today, we're going to play this John Nichols interview for you and this conversation that Sam had with him about his conversation with Bernie Sanders, the path forward for the left more broadly, etc. But let's start here because reportedly Donald Trump's transition team is already drafting executive orders to curb birthright citizenship in this country significantly. And a reminder for folks, birthright citizenship is not policy. It's actually enshrined in the amendment, in the 14th Amendment in the Constitution. It's supposedly a constitutional imperative. And the 14th Amendment, this part of it specifically, was a way to, it has its roots in slavery. The 14th Amendment birthright citizenship provision was there basically to clear up the Dred Scott decision, which said that Black people had no citizenship rights really in this country, and is considered one of the worst, most reactionary Supreme Court decisions in the history of this country. It basically said that if you're Black, you don't have citizenship rights as a slave, or even if you're a free Black person in this country, you don't have the right to citizenship. So this was a way to, in the constitutional amendment, clear that up and federalize it too, because if citizenship rights aren't made federal constitutional law, then you could have different states making different decisions on who is a citizen, who is not. And you can understand that in Civil War times and in the aftermath of the Civil War, why that was incredibly dangerous and problematic. So this imperative by Donald Trump is both racist on its face and racist in its history. So here he is on with Kristen Welker yesterday on Meet the Press talking about this initiative by him.
Before we get to all of that, let me ask you about some of your other promises on this topic. You promised to end birthright citizenship on day one. Is that still your plan?
Yeah, absolutely.
The 14th Amendment, though, says that, quote, all persons born in the United States are citizens. Can you get around the 14th Amendment with an executive action?
We're going to have to get a change. We'll maybe have to go back to the people, but we have to end it. We're the only country that has it.
Through an executive action?
We're the only country that has it. Do you know, if somebody sets a foot, just a foot, 1 foot, you don't need to, on our land, congratulations, you are now a citizen of the United States of America. Yes, we're going to end that because it's ridiculous.
Through executive action?
I was waiting for there to be a follow-up by Kristen Welker, but there wasn't. Not that his lies seem to even matter in this completely corroded media environment that we're a part of, but let's just pull up this graph. We are not the only country that has birthright citizenship. Basically, every country in the Americas, both North and South, has it. You can see Canada, Mexico, Brazil, Argentina.
Oh, Colombia, the one outlier. I wonder if that's for a good reason.
Yeah, exactly. That's actually, I didn't even consider that. And then all of those European countries and Australia, South Africa, India, they have restricted citizenship, but
a lot of
still
the colonial
birthright.
countries that had no problem scattering people to colonize the rest of the world for like hundreds of years are very sensitive about, we need blood and soil restrictions here.
It's exactly right. I think, when we're talking about borders and citizenship, our colonial history is really important here. Like, this is going to be used to target specifically Latino people as well, if Donald Trump gets his way. And our relationship with Mexico is one that is built on our colonization of the West. And the massacres of the indigenous people in the southwest of this country.
And guess what? Who's disproportionately indigenous? It's the people that are forced into migration through Central America. Like, it's often the people who, it's not the sort of European descendants in Mexico that are often pushed to that. Oh, of course, there's a varied array, but it's generally disproportionately so indigenous folks.
So let's hear him lie some more.
You don't need to on our land. Congratulations, you are now a citizen of the United States of America. Yes, we're going to end that because it's ridiculous.
Through executive action?
Well, if we can, through executive action. I was going to do it through executive action, but then we had to fix COVID first, to be honest with you. We have to end it. It's ridiculous. Do you know we're the only country in the world that has it? Do you know that? There's not one other country.
What about the legal challenge, inevitable legal challenges that'll come?
Do you know we have thousands of judges? Somebody walks onto our land, and we have to now say, welcome to the United States. They could be a criminal or not a criminal. We release them into our country. It's called catch and release. We release them into our country. Wait, just one second. And now they get them lawyers. And the lawyers are good lawyers. And everybody has a lawyer. And do you know how many judges we have? Thousands. Now, here's what other countries do. They come into the land and they say, I'm sorry, you have to go. And they take them out. Okay? With us, once they touch our land, we're into litigation that lasts for years, costs us hundreds of billions of dollars. We have judges, and I'm sure they're all honest, but I don't know that for a fact. You can imagine what's going on with the judges. But just so you, because I have a lot of judges, I tell you what.
Or does she follow up in any way? Like, by executive order, when she says legal challenges, that's a bit of an understatement, because an executive order that flouts the direct language of the Constitution would, in theory, be a significant legal challenge. For all these conservatives that fetishize the Constitution, just know what they mean. When they talk about the Constitution or they talk about original intent, they have zero regard for the Constitution, and most of them probably who are saying this to you, maybe in your personal life, have no idea what's in it. Because this is Donald Trump basically saying, through executive order, I am going to, in no uncertain terms, attempt to curtail a right that is clearly enumerated and written out in the Constitution, as Welker did read to him there. Now, a lot of folks are going to say, well, you can't do that because to change the Constitution, you need 2/3 of both the House and the Senate, and that's an enormous task. So don't worry too much about it. Or, like the example I just gave, you just need a corrupt right-wing Supreme Court. In the case of Dred Scott, that's how they were able to curtail citizenship rights for Black people in this country. If I could 100% see this right-wing Supreme Court looking through that 14th Amendment and trying to parse it to make it so that, well, not exactly if you're born on this soil, because there's the born part and the naturalized part. And I could see them creating a schism between those two pieces of wording in that amendment.
This isn't that important, but this is just 10 seconds. Can we just quickly look at Kristen Welker's follow-up here? I just wanted to confirm.
Yes, I would like that. I would like to see what it is.
Every other country, when somebody walks on and they see that they're here illegally, they walk them off, they take them back to where they came from. We have to get rid of this system. It's killing our country.
Let's talk about health care. I've been talking to Republicans.
All right, great. Yeah, that's called asylum protections. But he is right in the sense that he did try to do this. He did try to basically use his authority with this expedited removal authority that he put into place during his first term. It was initially blocked by a district court in 2019, but then COVID hit, and it was essentially used during that time period. The reasoning for his order changed. It was about public health, and that's the pretext that Donald Trump used to try to kick out all these people and have this brutal border policy. And Biden continued it until 2022, and then essentially ceded all of the framing on this issue to the right. There was a leadership vacuum on this front, and all the Democrats, for the most part, in the mainstream of the party did was validate these narratives and then try to hypocrisy shame Donald Trump for not wanting to fix the border with the bill that he ended up killing. And once again, too cute by half and no real underlying ideology.
When you meet them in wherever, then they only have one direction to move, which is to the right.
Yeah.
So, like, this is why when you say, oh, actually, sirs, we wanted to strengthen ICE, and you walked away from us in Parliament.
Right.
Actually, what their response is, oh, yeah, what about those people who got temporary protected status? Let's get them the F out of Illinois. Like, this is the problem with Democrats and all these goddamn consultants saying, actually, let's do a West Wing type of maneuver. Look what it did.
Yeah.
Harris got washed, and now this stuff is just rolling faster and faster downhill.
I mean, it really, and on this issue in particular, it's the most egregious because at the end of the day, they mocked AOC going to the border and crying and seeing what she saw down there. But it's a completely inhumane policy, and it's only going to get worse. Because of climate change, because of the immiseration that this country in particular has caused in the global south and in South America in particular. So it's only going to get worse. And Donald Trump, for everything about him that is, he's a liar, he's a horrible human being by every single metric. But from what he communicated to the public was that he was consistent on one issue when he rode down that escalator and said that Mexicans, some of them are rapists, but some he assumes were good people. Is that his one brand and policy issue has been immigration. What were the Democrats offering that they stood behind? And so you see,
it's all solvable. But
yeah.
E-Verify, and then Rashida Tlaib, every time this comes up, she said on with Hassan, I put on the thing for calling for penalties for the capitalists who do it. If the Democratic Party could get behind that, they would have a message on this. But guess what? They're corrupt by the same people who like to exploit this.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, the border is broken to a degree, right? Like our system is broken. But it's not a problem of enforcement or more militarism or more surveillance or more police. The problem is that we need to update our processing. We need to make a more humane, create a more humane immigration system so people who are seeking asylum, when they are using their internationally, legally, and domestically, by the way, supposedly in this country, recognized right to seek asylum in this country, that there's a formal process so people don't slip through the cracks. So say there's some scary big bad that Donald Trump refers to, we don't grant them asylum, right? In theory, that's what somebody that's interested in governing as opposed to demonizing a certain group would be engaged in. But because it's more beneficial for Republicans and some section of Democrats for people to not think about our system in any structural manner and just try to go after certain groups of people, we have not addressed this in any real way. And we've really degraded the conversation, even since the Obama years, when we were talking about dreamers in a more humane fashion. And I put that at the feet of Democratic leadership, and specifically Joe Biden. All right, folks, quick break. And when we return, a word from our sponsors. After that, Sam's conversation with John Nichols will be right here. Be right back.
Thank you, Emma. Hey, forget everything you know about fasting. Prolon by L-Nutra is the only patented fasting mimic diet that combines the benefits of prolonged fasting with a science-backed nutrition plan so you can hit your wealth and your weight loss goals without actually having to give up all food. Introducing Prolon. It's a revolutionary plant-based nutrition program that nourishes the body while making cells believe that they're fasting. It was researched and developed for decades at the University of Southern California Longevity Institute. It's backed by leading U.S. medical centers. Prolon helps promote healthy blood sugar, support cardiovascular health, and reduce abdominal fat. But Prolon is not a diet. Prolon is science. It is science based on Nobel Prize winning discoveries in medicine. And this all starts with Prolon's 5-day program. They give you snacks, soups, beverages. They put it in, discrete boxes. So day 1, day 2, day 3, day 4, day 5. And all of it is designed to keep your body in a fasting state. It really is unlike anything you've ever experienced. I did it back in February of this year. I'm probably going to do it again soon because you feel great and it's rejuvenating. And the research shows that by the time you get to like day 4 and 5, your body starts to regenerate cells because of your body thinks it's in this fasting state. My sister did it. It's not super easy, but it's a lot easier than you would anticipate. I did the show when I did it in February, and I actually felt great. Right now, Prolon's offering the Majority Report with Sam Seder listeners 15% off their 5-day nutrition program. Go to prolonlife.com/majority. That's PROLON life.com/majority for this special offer. Also, sponsoring the program today, this is a great, great gift for the holidays, really anytime. And it's a great gift because it's actually it's not just 2 gifts in one. It's really it depends on how many cousins or brothers or sisters you have or family members. What I'm talking about is Storyworth. It is a gift that genuinely keeps on giving. And what it is that it's a way in which to create someone's record of their life in some ways, and then give it back to them, and then give it to others who love that person. Want to thank Storyworth for sponsoring the Majority Report. Storyworth is offering $10 off your first purchase at storyworth.com/majority. And here's how it works. Each week, Storyworth emails your loved one a thought-provoking question that you help pick. Things like, I don't know, what's the bravest thing you've ever done? Or what was the weirdest movie you ever saw? Or the strangest date? Or how did you get to school every day? Whatever it is. And all your loved one needs to do is respond to that email with a story that's inspired by the question. Doesn't even have to be inspired by the question. It's a story. It can be long, short, doesn't matter. You're going to be emailed a copy of your loved one's response. And you'll keep getting that email once a week. And after 1 year, Storyworth compiles your loved one's stories and photos in a beautiful keepsake hardcover book that you're going to be able to give to them, give to yourself, give to your husband or wife or partner, or give to your kids, or give to your brothers or sisters. I mean, that's why I say it's I don't know, 10 gifts in one. And I will tell you from personal experience, you don't know how long your loved ones are going to be with you or going to be able to tell you stories. And you don't want to lose this information, both for yourself, for your kids, for your family. It's a great service. It's a great idea, and super easy to do. Families love Storyworth. It has 35,000 5-star reviews on Trustpilot, millions of stories preserved since they were founded over 10 years ago. Storyworth, I'm giving those I love a most thoughtful, personal gift from the heart, and preserving their memories and stories for years to come. Go to storyworth.com/majority. Save $10 on your first purchase. That's storyworth.com/majority. Save $10 on your first purchase. We'll put the link in the podcast and YouTube description. Now back to Emma. We are back. Sam Seder on the Majority Report. It is a pleasure to welcome back to this program National Affairs correspondent for The Nation magazine, John Nichols. John, always a pleasure.
It's an honor to be with you, brother.
So, about a week or so ago, I guess now, you published, I'm not sure exactly when you sat down with Bernie Sanders, but obviously this is in the wake of Donald Trump winning the election. And you had an interview with him that made some waves because it feels like Bernie is trying to figure out what's next for for progressives and people on the left in this country. And in some ways, he's sort of like, he's tried a lot of different avenues. Give me a sense of what you came away thinking from that interview.
Well, it was a terrific interview, and I've, like you, Sam, I've interviewed the senator a lot of times. I've known him over a long period of time, and it is absolutely true that he, as a guy getting into his mid 80s, he probably reads more and consults more than almost anybody in politics. He's constantly interested in the evolution of politics, and he clearly came out of the 2024 election, looked at those results, and said there are now some fundamental things that have to shift. I mean, he had his initial critique, which is that the Democratic Party has kind of lost its way as regards communicating with working class voters, multiracial, multi-ethnic working class voters, a very key message there. But in our conversation, I was interested in something else he had said, and that was that in some states, the Democratic brand is so weak that Democrats should stand aside, let independents run as independent, working class, progressive candidates who just don't carry the weight of the Democratic name. And that's a very controversial thing to say, right? Because parties are very obsessed with their brands. They don't want to give that space to somebody who is not, running on their line for a variety of reasons. They don't want to acknowledge there are places where they just can't compete. And yet, I think Sanders kind of, he broke the ice on this one. He basically said, look, there are places where the Democratic Party is not competitive, and where if you want to achieve a functional working class politics in America that will primarily exist within the Democratic Party, ideally, but that will also bring in independents like himself. And remember, he's always run and won as an independent in Vermont, that's a approach that might work and actually be one of the better responses to this moment that we are in, where I think Democrats are desperately trying to figure out who they're going to be when they grow up.
Yeah, I mean, and he was, specifically citing, at least in this cycle, Dan Osborne out of Nebraska. And so, I mean, it's sort of a twofer, though, too, isn't it? Like, one is an electoral strategy that presumably would benefit the Democrats in the sense that, like, if Deb Fischer requires money from the Republican senatorial campaign, that's money that's not going otherwise. I mean, volunteers, et cetera, et cetera. But it also means that you're creating sort of almost like a coalitional, a coalitional thing in a place like the Senate or the House. Like, I mean, if there had been 20 Bernie Sanders over the course of, the 20 years that you and I have been talking, I know you've been talking to Sanders for longer than that. Yeah. In the House, let's say, we would see some very different outcomes, maybe.
You're so smart, Sam. That's exactly the right way to start to think about some of this. We are locked into a incredibly rigid two-party system in the United States. That system is reinforced by structural realities in the states, by huge amounts of money, and by a media that is literally too stupid to entertain more than two ideas at a time, and often not even two. And so as a result, the two-party system is sort of overwhelming. Is there a model in this system, acknowledging that it should be reformed in all sorts of ways? Is there a model to create something that's a little bit broader, right? That there's a little bit more space for independent and progressive ideas to be a part of the discourse, and to have a sort of a push and pull on the Democratic Party, recognizing that it will, at least in these times, be better than the Republican Party. And I think you're right. This is one avenue where you explore that. Remember, it's not new, this idea. Franklin Roosevelt's success in the 1930s as the head of a party that included people who sympathized with socialism, who actually were unquestionably socialists, all the way to rigid Southern segregationists who were just, unbelievably right-wing, right? These are all within the Democratic Party. How did he achieve the New Deal, which was imperfect, but certainly huge amount of social progress? It was because in the House and especially in the Senate, you had independents like George Norris, a former Republican. You had several progressives from Wisconsin. You had nonpartisan leaguers from North Dakota. You had farmer labor senators and representatives from Minnesota. And you had American Labor Party folks coming out of New York. You understand what I'm saying? You actually had this coalitional thing, and it actually is one of the things that made the New Deal better.
I mean, one point just we should point out in that dynamic is that when you're talking about those Dixiecrats, they, at least in terms of relative to the success of the New Deal, their ideology was, at least to their benefit, built around an ideology which necessarily did not have the power for a political pushback. In other words, they're talking about racism. They build it into Social Security, at least in some professions that were primarily, black or immigrant, that were not included. They have that good fortune of attacking a group of people who have no political power, right? I mean, at that time. So there's no pushback, or there's not the pushback from the black community in that instance. I'm just saying that for the point still stands.
Well, no, but I think it's important to understand that in that dynamic that you saw back in the New Deal era, where Roosevelt was getting pushed from the left, right? He didn't always do the right thing by any means, but there was a left, right? There was something that was pushing him and pulling him. And I think that was into that context that A. Philip Randolph came. And A. Philip Randolph, largely a non-electoral pressure, but his talk about a march on Washington in 1940, 1941, definitely forced the integration of the defense industries. And it similarly as pressure in 48 forced the integration of the military. And all sorts of real progress there. And so I think that having something akin to multi-party democracy, right, allows for more space for social movements outside as well.
100%.
Yeah, and so coming back,
I guess I'm thinking actually like one of the problems, and I guess maybe this was also a problem at that time as well, but I don't know that we've ever had an era that has been more dramatic this way. And the irony is that Sanders entered the 2016 election, in my sense, as an issue campaign, and his big talking point was, we're on the road to oligarchy. And I don't think there has been as blatant of an example of this, or dramatic, or real, never mind illustrative of the money, how money impacted this campaign. I mean, both on a presidential level. I mean, if Donald Trump had to raise his money without having 2 or 3 billionaires essentially fund a third of his campaign and take over essentially his get out the vote thing, the results of this could be very, very different. I mean, people don't talk about this. I hate to give Elon Musk credit, but his ability to jump in 6 months out, 3 months out from the election, dump $150 million into a get out the vote effort. That's a big deal when you're talking about a guy who doesn't even break 50%, or the AIPAC money that goes in to defeat Bowman and Cori Bush. This is like, Bernie was warning about this at the time, but now it's almost like, it's almost in the rearview mirror.
And Sam, one of the things I would say is this is not new, right? in the Democratic Party, there has always been, and in our politics in general, there has always been a money power, right? The money power has operated in different ways. I promise you, we're not going to spend all our time, rehashing the 1940s and stuff like that. But in the book I wrote on the fight for the soul of the Democratic Party, in 1944, Henry Wallace was talking about racial justice in America and talking about bringing that into the Democratic Party, forcing the Democratic Party to become a better party than it was. There was a combination of the Southern racists and the Wall Street folks, very clearly, to knock him out as the vice presidential candidate and to make sure that the party went in a very different direction. That was definitional for where this country's gone. What I will tell you, Sam, is again and again and again, when the left has tried to say, we are headed toward oligarchy, we are headed toward an overwhelming corporate power defining where our politics is, and frankly, we are headed toward a place where we don't address fundamental issues, racism, sexism, inequality, etc. There has been a kind of pushback on the part of the Democratic Party. What that has always done is empower the right wing of the Republican Party. I mean, that's become the reality of what we've got. And so now we find ourselves in a situation, right, where the right wing, extreme right wing of the Republican Party has found a way to represent the money power, and it does, by and large. This is, they're very representative of the oligarchy, but represent the money power and also develop some kind of working class base, right? And where does that happen? How does that happen? Well, it gets to right where you're talking about. It's communications, right? Taking over Twitter and turning Twitter into a platform, X, was a very, very big deal. What happened there was a very, very deeply troublesome development in our politics. I would argue some people would celebrate it, because what it tells you is that billionaires can buy platforms, right? And they can buy the places where we communicate. Now, there's a survey by Pew Research recently that showed that 26% of Americans say they now get their news, their primary news, off YouTube, right? That platform. Well, if I'm a billionaire, I'm thinking about, okay, where's my next step to influence this process? Do I give money to a candidate or do I buy a platform, right? And this is going to become, I think, one of the great challenges of the next few years. And it's notable. I think this is why you're seeing Zuckerberg and other people flying down or talk about flying down to Mar-a-Lago and stuff like that, because they recognize that we're sort of coming into platform wars, right? It's no longer about getting on MSNBC to do an appearance to talk about something. This is now about, literally, having a dominant oversight of a platform on which people get most of their news. This is huge stuff that we're talking about.
Just getting back to sort of like Bernie's strategy. Is he, or do you think I don't know if he's thought this out, but do you think that he's thinking in terms of like a third party or like a genuine, like one that's coordinated across certain states? Or is he talking about some type of mechanism in which to promote a series of independent candidates who ultimately share, coalesce around a core set of issues? And so that in the event that they get elected to the House or to the Senate, let's say, they can form coalitions, caucuses within those bodies.
Okay, I put a lot of good questions on the table there. And I want to say up front, I don't speak for Bernie Sanders, right? Some of this is stuff that's evolving right now and that he's talking about it and talking about it in very interesting ways. I had a chance to interview him and we went into some of this. I asked him specifically, are you talking about a third party here? And he said, no, that's not the vision he's working on right now. What he is working on is, I think it's fair to say, opening the Democrats up to operating on different ballot platforms, if you will, because we've been talking about platforms so much. And so, yes, you're going to have the Democratic line on the ballot. you're going to have the Republican line on the ballot. Is there another line that it's more likely than not an independent, not so much a third party, but somebody running as a genuine defined independent, as, by the way, Sanders does in Vermont?
Right.
Could you see that model develop in other places? Remember, we have a similar over in Maine. Angus King gets elected regularly as an independent. In both the case of Sanders and King, they caucus with the Democrats. They get their chairmanships out of that. They basically are actually pretty, connected to the Democratic Party, but they come in through a different route. And would it be possible if you had 5 or 6 of those people in the Senate who had come in through different routes and came from different places around the country? Could they coalesce into something, an independent caucus? It's possible, right? But one of the things, Sam, that's complex about this is they might come from different parts of the country. There might be an independent who won in Vermont who would come in with a different approach than an independent who won in Utah.
Right.
Right. So they might not necessarily be on the same page, but they might support and sustain one another with the idea of, being part of that Democratic caucus, but not being fully subsumed to it.
I mean, I would take, Angus King over, Joe Manchin any day.
Oh, yeah.
Right? Like, I mean, who cares what the letter he has behind his name? It's where he votes is really what is the issue.
Yeah, and I give you an example that Lisa Murkowski on a lot of issues as a Republican was better than Manchin.
Yeah. Yep.
You know what I mean? So you really get into a dynamic that we don't talk about enough in American politics.
The only thing I would say about the difference between, Murkowski and King, obviously, regardless of the voting record, is who she empowers to run the Senate.
Absolutely.
Her presence as a Republican. So he's basically looking, it seems to me, I mean, at least from what you've gleaned as to where he's at so far, is a sort of all of the above. And who is he directing this to? Like, for instance, in New York, we have fusion parties, right? Yeah. So I will vote on the WFP line. I'm registered as a Democrat because I want to choose who's going to be the nominee in that, but I will vote on the WFP line. Once in a blue moon, they'll put up an actual WFP candidate in New York. But they're also building out in Connecticut and I think in Pennsylvania, and there's a couple other states where the WFP sometimes runs, on a more local level. But who is he saying this to? Like, I mean, like,
I think it's fair to say, and again, not speaking for the guy, I think it's fair to say he's saying it to 2 groups. Number one, to progressives who are trying to figure out where, how do we deal with this situation that we're in, right? Because we have been saying for a very long time, the Democratic Party is not doing enough outreach to a multiracial, multi-ethnic working class. Now we have evidence that has really proven to be very harmful to the party, right? It's had an impact on an election. There's an openness to a discussion about this, but how do we actually make the Democratic Party get better on these issues, right? And how do we, frankly, get the Democratic Party to stop being stupid, right, about an awful lot of stuff, and that's a hard challenge because I'll give you a good example. One of the things that I've seen recently is there's a lot of people who are saying, oh, well, the Democratic Party has got to move to more socially conservative stance, like somehow that's gonna win things over or de-emphasize support for LGBTQ rights or things like that. That's just stupid. There's not, even the people who are at the top level of the Harris campaign say that what was moving the votes prior to the election was the Trump ads attacking Bidenomics, right? It wasn't, all the vicious anti-trans ads and things like that. It was, it was still these economic ads that were having this profound impact. And so I think that for a lot of progressives, they're very frustrated with the Democratic Party. They're frustrated with how to make it, do the right thing, to be a party of economic and social and racial justice, saving the environment, promoting peace. And so what Sanders is saying is, well, there's routes here. There are ways to try and work sometimes within the party, but sometimes outside of it, to have primaries, to do things and that. So that's one place where I think he's speaking to progressives around the country and that. The other place I think he's speaking, and it's because of the prominence of being a U.S. senator, is to the leadership of the party.
Right.
And literally saying, these people you see in the halls of the Senate, there's a real problem here. And that you've got to become more flexible, at the very least, in how you respond to things so that the Democratic Party is not kind of locked into a losing cycle. And Sam, this is the big deal. We are in a whipsaw moment in our politics in America right now. The last president of the United States, I hope I'm right about this, I think I am, who had 4 years with a party, with a Congress controlled entirely by his own party, was Jimmy Carter. We've whipsawed all the way through. We've had
Scott Brown made it impossible for Obama. Yeah.
But it's true. And then Obama, ultimately he lost, his majorities and stuff like that. And so did Clinton, but so did Bush. And then we've recently been on an even more intensive whipsaw cycle where since Obama left, we're now into we're on our third president party that was in power, right? Party of power, losing the presidency, right?
Right.
So Obama to Trump, Trump to Biden, Biden to Trump. And so in this period of whipsaw politics, right, where it seems like people are so angry and so frustrated that they literally are willing to empower someone as president and then take that power away, throw that person out, empower somebody else, take that power away in a midterm. You know what I mean? This churn. One of these parties has to figure out how to talk about something bigger and bolder that gets you beyond the whipsaw, right? That gets you to, some sort of point where you're not flashing back and forth, right? That you're actually moving forward. And I think the only way you get there is with a great big vision. Now, Trump doesn't have a great big vision. Trump has a chaos vision. And it's very much about taking things apart. The question is whether Democrats can develop a vision that is about putting something together, doing something real. And I think Sanders is trying to speak to that bigger picture, if you will.
Do you have a perspective on who people might coalesce around? Like, I mean, I don't know. I'm trying to think, if I even had close to an imagination in 2012 of Bernie Sanders coming as close as he did in that 2016 primary. I mean, there was.
You'd be smarter than me.
I mean, I know that, from my perspective, and I'm curious as to yours, what happened with Sanders was that there was a draft Elizabeth Warren movement that I think started cropping up around 2014.
Yes.
And there was already a, not movement in the big movement sense, but there was a movement. Like, she was somebody who was one of the first people to come out and support Occupy as a senator. And there was almost like a slight coalition of people there. When Bernie basically took that mantle, he expanded it, I think, significantly. But the idea that there was already something coalescing, and where it's one thing where you have to build it completely from scratch. It's another if you have 10, 20, 30% on day one. And I'm not sure. I mean, it may be premature to be talking about that, but because I certainly don't see it. But
I don't think there's anything wrong with talking. Yeah, one of the things is I always am unsettled by folks who say, "Oh, well, we shouldn't talk about 2028, or we should talk about." No, of course you should, right? That's what political people do when they're not on camera, right? It's just that the advantage of this show. I hope one of the things that you're respected for is your willingness to bring it on, right? To actually have the deeper conversations, the more fundamental conversations. And so I think that we do see the outlines, the rough outlines. Initially, you're going to have this race for chair of the DNC, right? And that in its own way it has some definitional power. But beyond that, then we do start to talk about 2028. And of course, there are already people positioning. There's no question. I think it's very notable that Chris Murphy, the senator from Connecticut, has basically, tried to grab that lane.
Right. Yep.
And you can like him, dislike him, agree with him, disagree with him, but it's pretty clear that he is, he's moving more toward that progressive populist message. Very interesting to watch. You always are intrigued when things like that happen. But I also think, and I think this is important to say, I think there is a little boomlet, a little interest in AOC.
Yep.
And again, you can like, dislike, agree, disagree, but I think there's a discussion out there. One of the things that I think you have to recognize is, I happen to believe that the worst lesson you could take away from the 2024 election would be that we can't have a woman president, or we can't have a person of color as president. I don't think that's true. I think that it is absolutely time for a woman as president of the United States. And I also think that it is absolutely true that as this country becomes more diverse, we have to be looking at candidates who are far more diverse than the pool we have traditionally looked at. I think that's important to say, because sometimes after you have a defeat, you go toward a cautious space, right? 2016 gave us Joe Biden, right? Very kind of cautious candidate. And I think you'll have some pressure for that. But if you're going to get out of this sort of like, again, that whipsaw situation, right?
Yep.
Then I think you do need to want to look at more dynamic figures who might come up. And there's a lot of folks who are talking about a run, and or at least who are being talked about as such. I hope they get out there early and start, trying to build something up, right?
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that Harris was hurt by the lack of a primary campaign, not even both as a candidate, but also in terms of how it was educating and engaging the electorate. But you mentioned the DNC. One of the people who just jumped into the race for the chair of the DNC is Ben Wickler. He has been the chairman of the Wisconsin State Party. I worked with him at Air America years and years ago. He was also the head of Move On at one point, in Avaz, which is sort of like an international iteration, or was, of Move On. Give me your sense of Wickler, what he's done in Wisconsin, and if you have a candidate in this race. I mean, obviously, people like floating Rahm Emanuel's name. I break out at hives at the notion.
Yeah, I'm going to say right up front, Rahm Emanuel is not my candidate.
Yes, I
put that on the table.
It would be my first bet on Polymarket.
Well, what I'll say is this. I think there's talk about Rahm Emanuel. I kind of doubt that he's going to step up on this race, because frankly, there's been a lot of blowback already of people saying that's a terrible idea. You've got a bunch of candidates who are already in. Martin O'Malley, who was former governor of Maryland, ran for president, didn't go very far. I don't necessarily see O'Malley as having a strong lane, but he's in the running, and you never know where things end up. I think right now the front runner is Ken Martin out of Minnesota. And
DFL. Yeah.
And remember earlier we were talking about these independent parties, of the past on the left. Minnesota had a Democratic Party, and it had a Farmer Labor Party. They merged in the mid 40s and became the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. It's been one of the more progressive state parties in the country for a very long time. It's also, frankly, a successful party. There's a blue wall, or that historic blue wall that started in Minnesota, went all the way over, through Pennsylvania and into maybe even Western New York. And of those places, Martin has successfully kept Minnesota. I don't think he alone, but obviously his party has kept Minnesota in the Democratic column. That's pretty amazing. And he has support from people like Keith Ellison and others who are, people of that state. He's also been out kind of running for this for longer and has developed a lot of endorsements. Ben Wickler just got in, and I think he's gotten in with quite a bit of excitement. And not just in Wisconsin, which is his base, but also around the country. Robert Reich just wrote a very long column talking about why Wickler was the one. I think Michelle Goldberg just had something, and some other folks. And so you're seeing these voices from around the country. More importantly, you're seeing some voices at grassroots activist groups that have been impressed with him. And so I think that Wickler comes in this as a very strong candidate, and is also, frankly, seen as probably the candidate with the clearest progressive pedigree or progressive kind of background, however you measure such things. And it's that work and move on. It was an activist organizing commitment. And frankly, it's the story of Wisconsin. Wisconsin was, there was a time in the 2010s where it looked like Wisconsin was heading the way of becoming a reddish state, one where Democrats really couldn't compete. And Wickler came in 2019 after I think Democrats had sort of turned the corner a little bit and were starting to come back. But Wickler really built that in at a fundamental level, taking it down to the counties, to the cities, the villages, the precincts, really building out a multiracial, multi-ethnic party, a party that recognized its need to reach out to all sorts of communities that have frankly been neglected in the past, urban and rural, and it's kind of amazing. There's simply no question that, as an example, in this last election, on all the battleground states, the Democrats lost. They lost everywhere. They lost by dramatically less in Wisconsin. Yep. And notably, I was just looking at some figures out of rural counties. They held their rural vote dramatically better in Wisconsin than they did in other states. They also, frankly, had a boost, not a sufficient one, but a boost in their urban vote, and some really, I think, dynamic, important outreach and efforts in the Black community in Milwaukee, in Racine, some other places. So you're seeing this kind of granular politics actually kind of working, and not always succeeding in every race because it's a very closely divided battleground state, but something that has worked. And Wickler's been at the heart of that. He really preaches that gospel. And the biggest thing that he achieved is one that I don't think people always measure as closely, although you'll know it, Sam, is that he early on determined that the Wisconsin Supreme Court, which was conservative controlled, was a barrier to everything, right? And so over a multi-year period, they developed a model for running candidates for the Supreme Court and winning competitive races. The Supreme Court has now got a progressive majority. And just yesterday, a judge in Dane County threw out Scott Walker's Act 10.
Well, this is what this is where I was heading to. Describe Act 10, because as I'm sitting here, I mean, I doubt you remember, but I was out there covering those protests in Madison, and you are like the it's not official, of course, the mayor of Wisconsin in many respects, and saw you out there, and I'm looking at a sign right now that says the Wisconsin 14 never gave up, when neither will we. Right. This was, I think there were 14 senators who basically left the state and hid out. I can't remember where they went.
They hid out at Great America in Illinois. And they some of them actually like crawled out windows and things and what they were doing is withholding the majority.
Yeah, right? They didn't want a quorum. No quorum there
from the Republicans, and they held it up for a better part of a month. And it was part of a genuine effort to try and prevent Scott Walker, who had won one election, from undoing, a century of Wisconsin progressive governance. And Walker was very, very determined to do that because he wasn't stupid. And Walker knew his way around. He came to power, and what he knew was he needed to do two things. One, gerrymander the state. Yep. And they gerrymandered the state at just epic levels of gerrymandering. And then two, undermine the public employee unions, which had been really, in many ways, a backbone of the Democratic Party, and also, in many cases, in a broader sense, progressive politics in Wisconsin. And he did both. He got away with it. And he got away with it despite all the resistance to him, because they basically bent the rules of the legislature, pushed the law through. And then when it was clearly there were multiple violations of standard procedure, practice, the rules, everything, as well as a real huge constitutional problem with unequal protection, right? They exempted some unions that had actually
the cops and the firefighters were exempted, based upon what? Nothing.
Well, some of them had backed Walker.
Right.
You know what I mean? But he also saw I think he saw the deeper dynamic, which was that these were popular forces within communities. And if you could separate them out from the rest of the labor movement,
100%. And also we're, 10 years out from 9/11, where, first responders were also sort of we're still very, very much in the news, in the forefront, and promoted and propagandized in many respects. And one of the other things we got to also mention, it seems to me, is that Wisconsin was at that time almost a laboratory for the Koch brothers and the Americans for Prosperity Project to roll out this legislation, which ended up being model legislation to get rid of right to work and whatnot, and all sort of laundered through ALEC, the American Legislative Executive Committee, and this became sort of like the pilot program for a lot of stuff that we saw across the state. We saw it in Wisconsin when they tried to disempower Evers. We saw that crop up in North Carolina with Cooper. I mean, there was a lot. Wisconsin, in many respects, is sort of like, I remember somebody telling me that some town in Ohio, I can't remember where it is, some city in Ohio is like where Wendy's rolls out their burgers to test it. But Wisconsin very much, it seems like, was like a laboratory for a lot of this sort of really regressive policies.
Look, Wisconsin has historically been referred to as the laboratory of democracy. Brandeis, a century ago, talked about it as such. And it is because Wisconsin's there's a lot of complexities in how Wisconsin operates, but if a governor gets the governorship and control the legislature, it's immensely powerful. You can really set the direction of the state. Now that 100 years ago, a little over 100 years ago, when Wisconsin, the most progressive state in the country, or one of the most progressive, when Walker came to power, you went in almost the exact opposite direction. And it did become a laboratory of democracy, or of anti-democracy. It's important to understand that in addition to anti-labor laws, which really did in many ways decimate the labor movement in Wisconsin, which were done to alter the politics of the state, gerrymandering done to alter the politics of the state. You also saw with the Walker administration and its allies in the legislature a huge attack on the university system and on the University of Wisconsin, and done very cynically, very crudely, in all sorts of ways that challenged. I mean, to this day, they're busy challenging and attacking DEI and things like that. They're constantly trying to put immense pressure on the university to not be, a source of progressive thought, and of course, a source of a place that embraces diversity, that seeks to actually bring more people in, do more, et cetera. And so this right-wing experiment in Wisconsin kind of took in everything you would see from, what you're seeing with DeSantis down in Florida, what you're seeing with, Trump at the national level. You saw it all in Wisconsin. Now, the only reason I put that all on the table, aside from just a little bit of history, is because what happened in Wisconsin with the 2023 Supreme Court election was an opening of the door to address all of the sins, for lack of a better term, of the Walker era, because so many of these things were unconstitutional, so many of these things were lawless, that there really was a space to come in through a legal strategy and upend, many things that Walker did. And so gerrymandering got upended through a multi-step process and had a huge impact on the last election. Now you're seeing, it looks like a process by which the anti-labor laws will be upended. And if that happens, Sam, that's not going to put a thumb on the balance for progressives. What it does, it just simply creates a space where progressives can compete fairly as they had in the past. If that happens, then, well, if it had happened before, if I can just tell you, if the unions had been empowered, if you had, upended Act 10, I think Kamala Harris would have won Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And the legislature would be a Democratic legislature. That's a huge impact. And again, this is not putting a thumb on the scale. What this is doing is saying, look, you want a fair politics. You want unions to be able to have a voice the same way that corporations do, or that, powerful institutions do. And I think maybe because of a few elections and some smart strategies, Wisconsin might be headed back in that direction.
John Nichols, National Affairs Correspondent for The Nation. Always a pleasure. I learn something every time, actually multiple things, frankly, every time we talk. I really appreciate it.
It's an honor to be with you, Sam. Thanks so much.
We are back, folks. Hope you enjoyed that conversation with John Nichols, who is, I will say, truly one of the nicest people in our business. I say that to him every time, but
I mean, I don't mean to be biased, but that's that upper Midwest for you.
it is. I really do think there's something to it. So really quickly, just some fun notes before we head into the fun half. There's a little bit of a merch situation. New merch that people may want to buy. Limited edition until the end of the year. There's an M Majority Report baseball hat in charcoal color, which honestly, for me, I think is it's a safe bet. You can wear it with any color. Gray is, Gray is easy. Gray is easy. It goes with everything. You don't have to worry about black and blue clashing. So I went with the charcoal. I think it looks great. And Majority Report baseball hats, if people want to get them, until the end of the month, the end of the year, you can get them at shop.majorityreportradio.com. Obviously, we'll put a link to that in the description wherever people are listening to or watching this. Another thing I wanted to plug is that over the weekend, I, on social media, was tagged in this portrait that was painted of me. It's incredible. And this is by Bana. She's 10. And she was displaced from Gaza. She and her family. I just couldn't believe this. I mean, obviously this was so beautiful. And
coloring and shading is amazing for 10 years.
And there's videos of her on her social media doing like these portraits. She did one of Rashida Tlaib that I saw Representative Tlaib responded to. And like the idea that interviews I'm doing or anything that we're doing highlighting the Palestinian cause is reaching people in Gaza or across the world, like that is so touching to me. And I am very humbled and grateful that she would draw something like that for me. And we're just trying to make a difference. So there's also a GoFundMe to help this family. They, as I mentioned, they've been displaced. They're in Egypt. Thankfully, they're not stuck in Gaza.
And you wonder how many children haven't been that lucky.
Yeah. And so if you have any disposable income, if you just want to share it on your social media, wherever, we'll put a link to that family's GoFundMe just to help them out because they lost everything in the genocide.
I mean, I say you wonder. We know it's tens of thousands.
Tens of thousands, exactly.
I saw somebody say that if you scroll the official tally, which is of course not complete, it takes to like page 14 before you get to people over the age of 1 or 2.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sorry, we're getting IM saying that's Tim Pool in the replies. It's a parody.
It's a parody of Tim.
Parody of Tim.
And some other loser.
Yeah. With that said, Matt, what's happening on Left Reckoning?
Left Reckoning, we had a fun Sunday show where we looked at this Tim Pool thing where he got mad about the young woman who had the PhD thesis on olfactory ethics and the political valence of saying, like, say, such and such group of people stinks. Somehow Tim Pool thought that wasn't relevant, although I would argue it's pretty relevant to a large part of his audience. But we got into the elitism that Tim Pool, he says, like, what, you want a tradesperson to pay for your PhD thesis? And that's such a divide and conquer technique, because of course we know the tax base, it would be rich people that would be paying for college education, including the educations of any tradespeople, provided they wanted to get a humanities education. But we looked at a guy named Carl Elliott, who was an Alabama congressman in the 50s, but he was from a poor tenant farmer guy who led to, one, the creation of the bookmobile. I don't know if you guys know about the bookmobile.
No.
That might have been like, I might have gotten a little bit of that because of North Dakota, but it was basically these kind of like ice cream truck type
that would come
things.
with books. I think I vaguely have a recollection of that. Yeah. I mean, we had book fairs too at school, but anyway.
So he created the first bookmobile program with federal funds, which created federal bookmobiles, and he also was central to the sort of student loan programs that helped a lot of people go to college after Sputnik was launched, and we realized we need a more educated populace. Anyway, we talk about his example and how he came from poor people and said that it should not be just for rich kids. If they want to get educated right after high school, it should be for everybody, which I think is a much better thing to say. Like, what about trade schools? But we also talked about him being an Alabama congressman in the 50s, and he tried to keep his head down and not challenge the George Wallace sort of white supremacy thing. And eventually they reapportioned him out. And despite him saying it, like, he basically says, like, I didn't echo his racism, but we tried to, like, serve our district. Nonetheless, George Wallace is like, you're getting federal funds for education. We can't be allowing that sort of thing. And they eventually, along with the Klan and the Highway Patrol, got him out when in an election that was caused by district downsizing. So an interesting little case study that I thought was good to contrast with Tim Pool's. And I've given a lot of the history there, but if you want to hear the whole thing, patreon.com/leftreckoning.
That sounds very interesting. Check that out, folks. Left Reckoning. And then on ESPN today, obviously, we will be recapping Week 14 in the NFL. We'll talk a little bit about that Soto contract to the Mets, poaching him from the Yankees, what it means. YouTube.com/ESPN show for today. All right, guys, we're heading into the fun half, and the number is 646-257-3920. See you there.
3 months from now, 6 months from now, 9 months from now. And I don't think it's going to be the same as it looks like in 6 months from now. And I don't know if it's necessarily going to be better 6 months from now than it is 3 months from now. But I think around 18 months out, we're going to look back and go like, wow. What? What is that going on? It's nuts. Wait a second. Hold on for a second.
The Majority Report.
Emma, welcome to the program.
Hey.
Matt.
What is up, everyone?
Nomi Key.
You did it. Let's go, Brandon.
Let's go, Brandon.
Bradley, you want to say hello?
Sorry to disappoint everyone. I'm just a random guy.
It's all the boys today.
Fundamentally false.
No, I'm sorry. Women's...
Stop talking for a second and let me finish.
Where is this coming from, dude?
But dude, you want to smoke this 7A?
Yes.
Hi, me? Is it?
Yes.
Is this me?
Is it me?
It is you.
Is this me? Hello, is this me?
I think it is you. Who is you? No sound. Every single freaking day. What's on your mind?
Sports. We can discuss free markets and we can discuss capitalism.
I'm gonna go Starlight.
Libertarians.
They're so stupid, though.
Common sense says, of course.
Gobbledygook.
We fucking nailed him!
So what's 79 plus 21?
Challenge Matt.
I'm positively quivering. I believe 96, I want to say.
857-210-501. 1/2. 3/8.
9/11, for instance.
$3,400, $1,900.
5, 4, $3 trillion sold. It's a zero-sum game.
Actually, you're making me think less of it.
But let me say this. Poop.
Call it satire. Sam goes, it's satire.
On top of it all, my favorite part about you is just like every day, all day, like everything you do.
Without a doubt. Hey, buddy, we see you. All right, folks.
It's just the week being weeded out, obviously.
Yeah, sun's out, guns out. I don't know.
But you should know.
People just don't like to entertain ideas anymore.
I have a question. Who cares?
Our chat is enabled, folks.
I love it.
I do love that.
Look, gotta jump. Gotta be quick. I gotta jump.
I'm losing it, bro.
2 o'clock. We're already late, and the guy's being a dick. So screw him. Sent to a gulag?
Outrageous.
Like, What is wrong with you?
Love you. Bye.
Love you. Bye-bye.
We are back, folks, and we'll open up the phone lines in a second, but I do want to just dive right in. We have breaking news. It appears that the killer of the healthcare CEO has been identified.
Well, allegedly.
Allegedly. We shall see. This is just like a quick rundown, breaking news from CNN of the facts that we have so far.
There is someone that is being questioned by investigators right now in Altoona, Pennsylvania. This person is 26 years old, according to sources telling John Miller. We've learned that they actually got a tip from someone at a nearby McDonald's in that area who said, hey, this guy looks like the person that's in all those photos that have been circulating. And that's how he was brought in for further questioning. And in doing so, according to sources telling John, that they found a lot of evidence that could point in the right investigation for authorities at this point. They found a gun that resembles the one that was used in the murder last Wednesday. They found a suppressor, which is basically another word for a silencer. It muffles the sound of a gunshot. We know that was also used in the killing on Wednesday. And they found a number of fake IDs with this person. One of those, according to sources, the NYPD does believe was used here in New York City. Now, also, if you remember, we reported that investigators believed their person who was responsible for this killing used a fake ID to check into a hostel in the Upper West Side of Manhattan. So it's possible that is one of those fake IDs. We've also learned from sources that there were some sort of documents that were with this person that is, again, brought in for questioning at this moment. And they're still going through all of those paperwork to figure out exactly what is said in
what is said in that, and I think that gave us a pretty good rundown. Apparently, there was a manifesto that was identified, a handwritten one found on this individual's person, criticizing healthcare companies for putting profits over care. That is what a senior law enforcement official is telling the New York Times. So there you go. It seems like the obvious Occam's razor motivation appears to likely be the case. Again, we don't know fully. This could not be the right guy. A name has been released. We're not going to tell you that name right now because this is just still breaking. But with all of that said, I wanted to play this Ben Shapiro clip for you guys because now that we're it seems like more than likely this killer was doing so based on a motive that
is understandable.
It's not justifiable, but understandable.
And kind of a shock that something like this hasn't happened, given the amount of people's lives that are thrown away for the profit of people like or companies like United Health.
I mean, lack of care, according to many estimations, is responsible for more people dying annually in this country than kidney disease. A recent study, I think, found something like 44,000 Americans in between the age of 18 and 65 before you're eligible to start receiving Medicare die from a lack of insurance. And I think sometimes people get a little confused because there are other countries that have a blend of private healthcare and a public option, for example, like Canada has both public and private, as does Germany, right? But the United States doesn't even have a public option for care until really 65, unless you're eligible for Medicaid, which is a slim number of people in this country.
The United States puts people in bankruptcy for cancer.
The top cause of bankruptcy in the United States is medical debt. So you both have tens of thousands of people dying every year due to a lack of insurance. You have the number one cause of bankruptcy being medical debt in this country. And you have a system that is almost entirely privatized until you reach a certain age. That means that basically these companies, they all have a profit incentive, and it's not just the health insurers, it's the for-profit hospitals, it's the pharmaceutical companies. And they're not working together, but they all are motivated to rip you off to increase their margins. And United Healthcare in particular is one of the biggest companies in this country. It's enormous.
It has a double the rejection rate of the average, which is also, I think, appalling. The average is appalling. That that United Health was above that significantly. All these other horrible parasitic institutions that we all know shouldn't exist, that it was doubly as bad as them. The company should be killed by the government.
And the point really is just like we have privatized people's basic needs to such a degree that it's enabled a guy like Brian Thompson to deny care to people, care that they need.
Use AI to do it. Hey, I can be denying claims while I'm playing golf.
And this is life or death for folks, as was just laid out in the fact that the raw numbers support how many people die because health insurers put profits over people, and that's why this kind of stuff needs to be in the public hands. And a public option, look, I'm pragmatic. I prefer a Medicare for all system. But if we get to a public option first, which makes private healthcare basically secondary or associated with things like plastic surgery or things that are more voluntary, even if it's dental or whatever, like that is a step in the right direction. But you would see when these private insurers would have to compete with a real robust public option, prices would go down.
All the politicians, including the ones in the Democratic Party, or a lot of them, are owned by these insurance companies. So, I mean, look, New York is going to have a good chance at a public option, I think, here, or I believe I've seen some lawmakers towards that. That is a state level health insurance is important. But right now, as it's currently situated, like if Obama would have went for a public option, it would have been one that was horrible. And basically like public housing. If you make it so it's just meant for poor people, it's not going to be good. And it needs to be made so people just don't worry about the private stuff anymore. But I want to read this from Frederick Engels from The Condition of the Working Class in England all the way back in 1845. When one individual inflicts bodily injury upon another, such injury that death results, we call that deed manslaughter. Well, sometimes. When the assailant knew in advance that the injury would be fatal, we call this deed murder. But when society places hundreds of proletarians in such a position that they inevitably meet a too early and unnatural death, one which is quite as much a death by violence as that by the sword or the bullet, when it deprives thousands of the necessities of life, places them under conditions in which they cannot live, forces them to remain in such conditions until that death ensues, which is the inevitable consequence, knows that these thousands of victims must perish, and yet permits these conditions to remain, its deed is murder just as surely as the deed of the single individual. And I'd say that deed happens way more than one single time. It happens every day. And from an AI bot now that says like, oh, I don't really trust that answer, denied, worry about chemo getting, take out a credit card or something.
And with those numbers, if we're putting 44,000 Americans die every year, that's more than 100 a day.
That's
right?
Worse than any Freddy Krueger movie. Like, I'm sorry, the kill rate of these organizations puts any horror movie monster to shame.
And then that's where we can bring it back to what the reaction was. The reaction of universal, like, let them get away with it from a lot of people, I think took some folks, liberals, by surprise. But also conservatives, because everybody in this country has to deal with, unless you're incredibly wealthy, a for-profit healthcare system that in some way has affected their family. Maybe your family member had cancer and they had to go through all their savings to undergo treatment. Maybe you were denied care because of a pre-existing condition prior to Obamacare, which, by the way, did ban that, and the Republicans tried to repeal it. And you thought you were eligible for this kind of